All right, here we go. Once again, I already did one video on this, but here we go. It just continues. Once again, it's like, where do they belong? I want to ask you, the audience, right now. Where does this belong? Does this belong in the better late than never category, or in the, yeah, no thanks, nobody wants to hear from you anymore, you're way late to the party, and you should be thrown out on the ash heap of history? Those are the two questions, or those are the two choices that we're going to answer in this video. Why would our governing elites be so motivated to overstate the impact of COVID-19? Why did we have to scare people beyond the unprecedented levels of panic that were already persuasive in early 2020? Hey everybody, Damon Roberts here, and I want to remind you that this video is brought to you by our friend Mike Lindell and MyPillow, mypillow.com, promo code LFS6B at checkout for 10 to 60% off. All right, we got to talk about it. Another video I have to do with someone who's either late to the party. Do we say, hey, better late than never, welcome to the party? Or do we say, yeah, no thanks, we were talking about this 2-3 years ago? But let's first jump back into the Wayback Machine, and let's head back to May 15th, 2020. Headline: a Republican state representative asked prosecutors to bring criminal charges against Colorado's top public health official Thursday, claiming that she illegally falsified death records to inflate COVID-19 death totals. Yes, that was a real headline. In a statement, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment said the department has used a nationwide standard accepted by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention to classify deaths. We classify a death as confirmed when there was a case who had a positive SARS-CoV-2 laboratory test and then died. We also classify some deaths as probable, their statement said. Well, in March of 2020, the CDC changed the way they counted deaths from COVID. Instead of only counting deaths that were caused by COVID, they suddenly counted all deaths where a person may have had COVID. Conflating deaths due to coronavirus with deaths of those who have coronavirus but ultimately succumb to other illnesses, that's what started in early 2020. See, here's how it went. At the time of death, it was a COVID positive diagnosis. That means that if you were in hospice and already had been given, let's say, weeks to live, and then you also found out to have had COVID, well, guess what? You would be counted as a COVID deaths. Remember Dr. Deborah Birx? Well, she let the secret out during a daily press conference once in response to a reporter's question.
So I think in this country, we've taken a very liberal approach to mortality.
What that meant was, technically, even if you died of a clear alternative cause, but you had COVID at the same time, it was still listed as a COVID death. And this happened everywhere. Medical examiners from Colorado to Michigan used that same definition. In Macomb, Georgia, or Oakland counties in Michigan, wherever it was, where most of the deaths in that state occurred, medical examiners classify any death as a coronavirus death when the postmortem test is positive. Even people who died in suicides, automobile accidents, motorcycle accidents, well, they met that definition as well. There's a difference between someone dying of COVID-19 and someone dying with COVID-19. Now, typically an autopsy would have been performed to determine the actual cause of death, and this is very important in determining the real fatality rate of a virus. Such expansive definitions back in 2020 were not due to rogue public officials, by the way. The rules directed them to do this. Quote, if someone dies with COVID-19, we are counting that as a COVID-19 death, White House Coronavirus Response Coordinator Deborah Dr. Birx said at the time. Beyond including people with the virus who clearly didn't die from it, the numbers were inflated by counting people who didn't even have the virus. Take New York, for example. New York classified many cases as coronavirus deaths, even when post-mortem tests were negative. The diagnosis can be based on symptoms, even though the symptoms are often similar to those of the seasonal flu. That's right. If you had the sniffles and died in New York in 2020, you were counted as a coronavirus death. The Centers for Disease Control guidance explicitly acknowledges the uncertainty that doctors can face when identifying the cause of death. When coronavirus cases are suspected, the agency counsels doctors that it is acceptable to report the COVID-19 on a death certificate. This advice has produced a predictable inflation in the numbers. Now, some of us have talked about this for years. Again, staying in the Wayback Time Machine on April 21st, 2020, when New York City's death toll rose above 10,000, the New York Times reported that the city included 3,700 additional people who were presumed to have died of the coronavirus, but had never tested positive, a more than 50% increase in the number of cases at the time. Nor can this be explained by false negative results in the tests. For the 5 most commonly used tests, the least reliable test still scored a 96% accuracy rate in a laboratory setting. Some doctors report feeling pressure from hospitals to list deaths as being due to the coronavirus, even when the doctors did not believe that that was the case. Quote, to make it look a little bit worse than it was, end quote. That is pressure that they say they never previously faced in reporting deaths from the seasonal flu. Of course not. There was more motivation behind this. We'll get to that in a second. There were financial incentives that make a difference for hospitals and doctors. The CARES Act added a 20% premium for COVID-19 medical patients. Dr. Birx and others were also concerned that the CDC's antiquated accounting system was doubling counting cases and inflating mortality and case counts, quote, by as much as 25%. Quote, when all these anomalies are added up, it became apparent that we simply don't have an accurate death toll from this new coronavirus, she said. But it seems clear that easily over 50% of the infection fatality rate is actually due to a cause other than coronavirus. The correct rate is still a little bit worse than the regular flu of 2017, 2018. All of it was purely misinformation to control you, the people, to basically get you to capitulate to dictatorial mandates with fear-mongering. This caused major undercounting of death from all the other causes. Everything was COVID back then. There was no flu, there was no heart attacks, there was no suicides, there was nothing else. Everything else was undercounted. See, the dirty truth is that hospitals were financially incentivized to code admissions for COVID. How many children's lives were destroyed because misinformation kept them out of school? How many deaths from suicide and other causes occurred because people were scared to get tests? How many old people died alone because children were told that they would kill their grandparents and others if they got near them? There was such an eager agenda to use this crisis to restrict your liberty. It was an opportunity, they saw it, to reshape the way that they did business and how this government governed. And that, of course, brings us to current day. On Friday, well, guess who? I'm an out. That's right. She's back once again. Dr. Leanna Wen, head of the Gestapo back 3 years ago. She was all in on lockdowns. Everybody stay home. You're not allowed if you're unvaccinated. Oh, man, you're the reason of everything bad. You shouldn't be allowed to leave your home. You're this, you're that. She was all in. Well, now, miraculously, 3 years later, she's come around on natural immunity. If you haven't watched my video that I did on that, I'll link it right above. And now she's come around on overcounting COVID deaths. What do you know? In the Washington Post on Friday, opinion, we are overcounting COVID deaths and hospitalization. That's a problem, Leanna Wen says. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the United States has experienced around 400 COVID deaths every day. At this rate, there would be nearly 150,000 deaths a year. But are these Americans dying from COVID or with COVID? Hey, welcome to the party, pal. Only 3 years too late. So this is what I said in the beginning of the video. Does this fall under the better late than never? Welcome to the party? Or, yeah, we don't even take you seriously anymore because you can't be 180 degrees on these issues within 3 years. You're the doctor. You're supposed to be the one leading us. You couldn't see this back then with everything that was going on, and now 3 years later, when it seems a lot more convenient to be able to come out and talk about these things, all of a sudden now you're on top of everything. Natural immunity is pretty good. Hey, what do you know? And now, we may be overcounting these deaths. Wow, hey, shocker. What do you know? Understanding this distinction, she says, is crucial to putting the continuing toll of the coronavirus into perspective. Determining how likely it is an infection will result in hospitalization or death helps people weigh their own risk. It also enables health officials to assess when vaccine effectiveness wanes and future rounds of boosters are needed. Well, I'll answer that for you. Never. And it wanes right away because they're not effective, as we know. So here you go, folks. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it just, again, as time goes by, the continuation of people coming around to where some of us were, thought critically about it. Did we say back then 100% we were right and they were wrong? No, of course not. We said, we should really be taking in more reliable data before we're making these decisions. This is something no one's familiar with. This seems like it could be off. Are we sure that we're doing this the right way? I again bring you back to Dr. John Ioannidis in one of the first videos I did here on the channel. We are making decisions without reliable data. He continues to be right to this day, as do many of the early doctors who were trying to say, wait a minute, let's all slow down here and think about what we're doing. And it was people like Dr. Wen who wanted no part of that, didn't want any part of that. It was vaccines all the time, lockdowns all the time. Now they're starting to come around. So where do you fall? Is this welcomed better late to the party than never? Or is this, yeah, I'm not listening to you, no thanks. You, Fauci, Birx, and all your type should be pushed out to the ash heap of history. Let me know in the comments below where you fall, and I'll see you in the next video.